Thank you for making it to this event. My name is Somik Raha, and I'm representing Sarvodaya at Stanford University. And this event is also co-sponsored by our Sisters and Brothers of Sanskriti, the South Asian organization of undergraduates on campus. And it's a great pleasure to have Tenzin Tethong with us today. He is the chair of the Committee of 100 for Tibet, and he's also the president of the Dalai Lama Foundation. He's been involved in many Tibet-related activities, ranging from self-determination initiative within the Tibetan exile community to international projects such as the Missing Piece and the Dalai Lama Portrait Project. He's a visiting scholar at Stanford University, where he teaches courses on Tibet in the History Department and the Continuing Studies program. He's a distinguished fellow, Tibetan Studies Initiative, and the chair of the Tibetan Studies Committee. And he's also a member of Project Compassion at the Neuroscience Institute. Now, a little word about why we're doing this event. So, Sarvodaya basically translates to welfare of all, and it was an organization started by Mahatma Gandhi, and it now exists in India and Sri Lanka. And while at first thought you might think this is a social service organization, it isn't really that. It is a self-service organization. And the only way you can really serve yourself is by serving others. So we're here to work on ourselves, and you can think of this as more a leader training organization. And through this event and events like this, we hope to learn from inspiring people on how to improve ourselves. So this isn't so much of a Tibet-China event. This is more of how do you learn to deal with conflict within yourselves and in our own lives? And what can we learn from the response that the Tibetan community has shown? And it's just been very incredible for me to see the newspapers over the last several weeks that in spite of extreme provocation, the Dalai Lama refuses to condemn, the Chinese government refuses to condemn the Olympics. He in fact supports it, and he condemns any kind of violence by the Tibetan community. And he's been doing this for several decades now. And Mahatma Gandhi also went through the same process where he threatened his Indian followers that he would call off the movement if they did not follow non-violence. And at one point he did. So we're at a very incredible time in our history, and we're very fortunate to be able to engage with Tenzin. And hopefully this is more of a part one of this series. Hopefully we will be able to have a follow-on discussion with the Chinese community and inspire compassion on all sides. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Tenzin. The only thing about the format is that we'll speak for 20 minutes, so you will have time for questions. So we'll probably do 20 minutes of questions, and at the end, we will do 20 minutes of a little brainstorm to see how we can fill our hearts with compassion and make a difference. Welcome, Tenzin.
Thank you. As they say, when you go to Stanford, you always learn something. My attempt at leading a meditation session was very good for me because this is the first time I've done it. I hope it was useful in small part. It was very good for me. So the format here is to speak very briefly, to give you a background to Tibet, and then to leave as much time as possible for questions and answers, and also for your comments and how we might resolve suffering and conflict, in this case in Tibet. I'm very honored to be part of the Sarvodaya program here at Stanford, because it's in the great tradition of Gandhi's work. And I see that before me, you've already had Nipun Mehta, who is an outstanding, true Gandhian. He doesn't compromise on anything. And he's done tremendous work in the Silicon Valley area. So if you don't know Nipun Mehta, look up Charity Focus and you'll see a real Gandhian worker right here in Silicon Valley. So Nipun is a great inspiration to those who know him already. And I'm also pleased that Professor Carson was here. He is the professor here at Stanford who's working on the documents and writings of Dr. Martin Luther King, and who was also greatly inspired by Gandhi's nonviolence. And I'm here, in a sense, representing the Tibetans who are caught in the headlines right now. We hope it'll be more than headlines, but right now we are sort of part of the headlines all over the world because of the Olympic torch and what's happening in Tibet. It was difficult trying to lead the meditation because there's a professor of Buddhist studies here, there's an ex-monk who's been meditating for 30 years, and there are many others who are much more knowledgeable about this, but that was my role in the early part here. Now, speaking about Tibet also, there are a few people here who know Tibet very well, but for those who are not quite sure where to put Tibet in the present context, let me try and give you a very quick snapshot, maybe like a 20,000-year snapshot in 5 minutes. Some people say Tibet is very special. I'm not quite sure about that, if you say the Tibetan culture and Tibetan people are special. But I know that the land of Tibet, so to speak, is very special. Tibet is this large plateau in the heart of Asia. It is roughly 1 million square miles, maybe larger if you are a bit more generous. But for those of you who live in America who are not sure about the size of things, it's like all the way from Texas to California. So it's one of the largest plateau areas in the world. And it's unique because all of it is above 12,000 feet sea level. So it's a very rarefied landscape. And it's not an easy place to live. But for whatever reasons, the Tibetan people, so to speak, lived on that plateau. And for the longest time in history, Tibetans thought that we've been there for a few thousand years. But modern archaeologists are now telling us that maybe some of the earliest Tibetans may have been there anywhere from 20 to 30,000 years ago. So I believe that puts us quite early in modern man's adventure out of Africa. So the Tibetans so if that is true, by and large, the Tibetans have lived on that plateau area for a long time, and the geography of Tibet has had an impact on the people. The extreme geography of altitude and not so pleasant sort of living conditions, sort of a hard place. And so it made the Tibetans very sensitive about nature and mountains and lakes, and in some sense felt or understood how insignificant they may have been in the big scheme of things. So that is the background to how the Tibetans lived on that plateau. Then around the 7th century, if I might call it, the modern history of Tibet, or the written history of Tibet, comes into play. And the biggest change that happened in Tibet was when Buddhism was introduced into Tibet. So today, some would say Tibetan Buddhists are maybe the most devout or most sort of actively engaged Buddhist community in Asia. Some would say that. But when Buddhism came to Tibet in the 7th century, we were probably the last recipients of Buddhism from India, while Buddhism had moved on to China and parts of Persia and the Middle East, and of course what is now Bangladesh and Pakistan. 400-500 years before it came to Tibet. Tibet was one of the last places where Buddhism came into Tibet, but it profoundly changed the whole sort of trajectory of Tibetan life and Tibetan effort. And from that time on until the modern era, basically Tibet embarked on a Buddhist journey, so to speak. And through this 1300 years of Tibetan engagement with Buddhism, while we have gone through many political and social experiences and upheavals like any other society, the Buddhist theme and this pursuit of the Buddhist idea of liberation and compassion for ourselves and for the universe became a very central theme of Buddhist Tibetan activity. So for the 1300 years, Tibetan literature focused primarily on Buddhist practices and Buddhist learning. Tibetan art focused primarily on Buddhist Buddhist art and for Buddhist meditation purposes. Even Tibetan medicine was combined with Buddhist practices. So all aspects of our life, including our social sort of traditions, everything to do from birth to marriage to death, and our eating habits and our living habits were highly influenced by Buddhism. So to sum it up, from 20,000 years back to the modern era, basically you could say Tibet was a 1300-year sort of experiment or effort in trying to be good Buddhists or good universalists in a sense. Whether the Tibetans were properly equipped to do that or not, we don't know, but Tibetan Buddhists felt that their prayers, their activities were for the benefit of all sentient beings in the universe. So we had shall we say, a very large sort of agenda that we thought we were keeping up. So that is essentially sort of what Tibetans did in the last 1300 years. But today, right now, we are talking in the context of what has happened in Tibet recently. Since March 10th until even to this very day, we still have reports of Tibetan demonstrations and protests in the Tibetan areas inside the PRC within China. And coupled with that, there's been a tremendous amount of media attention on Tibetans who were protesting the Olympic torch as it's been moving around from Greece and through Europe and the United States. So I thought I should give you a little background on that. As Somik just mentioned, even though this issue of the torch has been very contentious, and the Chinese government obviously and many Chinese are tremendously upset, and some even have been hurt by the fact that people around the world are protesting the torch when this is a great celebration and coming out party for the new China. They felt that this is an unfair sort of attack on what is happening in China. For the Tibetans are protesting because they feel that for 50 years nobody's been listening to them, especially nobody in the Chinese government. And the Tibetans feel that the great injustice going on in Tibet, the total subjugation of the Tibetan people, and all the policies that, if not deliberate, but by the nature of their sort of colonial, their colonial nature, are undermining the Tibetan identity, the Tibetan way of life, and especially the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, which are, as I mentioned earlier, at the core of Tibetan life. And Tibetans are also protesting because the official Chinese sort of torch relay is also going to go into Tibet. Many Tibetans feel this is a deliberate show to say that Tibet is part of China and that Tibet is under control. For other Tibetans, it's also a direct insult in a cultural sense because of Tibet's sort of relationship with this unique geographic area. Tibetans have also considered many of the lakes and mountain tops in Tibet to be sacred. These are sacred mountains, sacred lakes, and these are places where deities and gods and goddesses live. So to take a torch, which is a symbol of athletics participation, and to take it up a mountain top, to place it on the top, to essentially conquer it, so to speak, is actually a tremendous disrespect to the mountain spirits for the Tibetans. So there's a cultural element which Tibetans also protest. And then, of course, most Tibetans, those who are in exile, are protesting to try and take this opportunity. There's no doubt they're trying to take this opportunity to tell the world that there are serious issues under Chinese policies in Tibet. So these are the reasons that we're doing it. And surprisingly, many of us participated in some of these demonstrations and protests in San Francisco, and we found out that it's not just the Tibetans. There are many who seriously want to make the Chinese government feel more responsible about their policies in Darfur, where hundreds of thousands of people have died and are probably dying. They want to raise issues about basic human rights within China, issues relating to the military junta in Burma, and other issues where the Chinese government needs to be more accountable if they are part of the world community. So that is the context in which we are here today, and Sarvodaya is helping us in some ways to have an opportunity to discuss this and to share with the Stanford community, and this is not meant to be, as some might have suspected, an attempt to simply do China bashing, so to speak. And I think Sarvodaya has taken special steps to invite Chinese students and scholars and others who feel strongly that the issues should be discussed in proper context. I believe, if not in this, maybe in a follow-up session, we'll have more opportunities to discuss with people who have different points of view. And I'm here simply to basically speak on behalf of Tibet and the Tibetan people. And we want to use this forum to share with you in any comments you have, questions that you might have, and also to brainstorm a little, as Somik says, to see what suggestions, ideas that may come up in terms of how to address this ongoing conflict in Tibet, and maybe other conflicts as well in the spirit of Gandhi. So I think I'll leave it at that. We'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. Thank you.
Okay. I will run around with the mic, raise your hand, and just request that you keep the question brief. And before we start, I'm just going to throw out the first question that you have to mention. This is not a China bashing event. And
Just wanted to bring it to your notice that a lot of newspapers have portrayed violence in Tibet, but it actually was occurring in Nepal, Kathmandu. So there's a lot of anger within us, again, I guess for some reason or the other, against China, and it almost seems similar to what happened in the reporting situations in this country when there was a lot of evidence which was found against President Bush. There was a controversy some time back, and it was found that the report was fake. And so there's almost a desire to believe things that confirm what we already think about the world around us. And maybe, would you like to talk a little bit about that, the anti-China stance that we're seeing in the media today?
It's true. I think different groups who want to take this opportunity basically to more than point out China's errors, and who want to do a little China bashing for different reasons. As far as the Tibetans are concerned, as Somik mentioned, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has always been trying to be very careful about how the relationship between Tibetans and Chinese should go. Basically, he's always said that, Tibetans and Chinese have lived next door to each other for thousands of years. We know at least 2,000 years. And there have not been serious Tibetan-Chinese conflicts ever in history, except in the last 50 years. And in addition to that, it may sound a bit odd, but because of the Buddhist teachings, and to a large extent because of people like the Dalai Lama, who've always said right from the conflict, when Tibetans became refugees in the early 60s, that the problem and the difficulties that Tibetans have is with the policies of the Chinese government, it's with the Chinese Communist Party leadership, and that we should not be caught up in any sort of hatred about a ethnic group or a whole society. So while individual Tibetans, some have very strong hatred, so to speak, because a family member has been killed or family member has been lost or they've lost their homes. Collectively, as far as I know, there is very little, shall we say, collective hate, so to speak, within. But there is tremendous amount of anger for the policies of the Chinese. And even in the present round of protests and demonstrations in Tibet and outside as well, I think by and large Tibetans have kept this message very strong. Unfortunately, in the first few days of rioting in Lhasa, there have been a few cases of Tibetan violence on individual Chinese who may be innocent bystanders, and that has been sort of thoroughly condemned by His Holiness. And in fact, he said, you know, the Tibetan struggle should remain non-violent, and if Tibetans go out of control, he says, I want no part of it. So that is our position in terms of how to deal with the violence and negativity.
Isn't it true that the Dalai Lama has seen this point in time coming for the Beijing Olympics and has seen it as a time to publicize and put before the world the broader story of the events in Tibet, not with violence, but I seem to remember reading something about a year ago maybe where he was interviewed and said something about this being a time where there was some leverage. There's so rarely any leverage that Tibet has in this struggle with the Chinese.
You know, because it has been ongoing for a long time, there are many Tibetan groups, including those who support the Tibetan struggle, and other groups that are focused primarily on, let's say, human rights or freedom of speech. And most of these groups have been saying that you have to be more vocal, you have to be more demonstrative, or you will receive no attention either from the world or from the Chinese leadership. Just simple civilized protest is not going to work. It's a different age, a different time, and a different ruling elite. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in a slightly different way, has always been saying, I don't want to add to the conflict. I want to try and be reasonable. I don't want to always be with those who condemn China. I don't want to be part of China bashing. I want to respect the Chinese people. So when the Olympics came about, it didn't just happen in the last year. The official Chinese application to get the Olympics happened like 6 or 8 years ago, and they didn't get it the first round, and then the second round, and then you had 3 or 4 years. So it's been coming, and all during this time, yes, Tibet groups have said now is the time to test the Chinese government concerning their commitments to human rights and freedom of press. They should be held accountable. So each time this issue, the Olympics came up in different forums, the Dalai Lama has always said, we shouldn't boycott the Olympics. The Chinese people have the right to host the Olympic. They have a right to do it, but we should reserve the right to protest or point out what's wrong. So all along, the Dalai Lama, as you say, he has seen this coming, and he has tried to use this in a positive way. But many of the Tibet groups out there are saying there is no room left to just be civil about it because nobody's listening.
My name is Karthik. Trying to get a sense of, I know that it's probably a very complicated issue between Tibet and China, but are there any fundamental issues, and what is the nature of the issues between them? Are they political, religious, matter of independence? Is it economic?
The fundamental issue which I didn't address right away is basically it is about presently the Chinese government's intention to preserve the integrity of the People's Republic of China. They don't want any protests or any groups really getting out of hand and creating the fracturing of China, so to speak. So the basic argument the Chinese government has is that the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans are trying to split the country. That's why they use the term splittist. And the background to this is that the official Chinese government, Communist Party, the Chinese government position on Tibet is that Tibet has always been a part of China. Now this is a complicated historical argument, but there are sort of three sort of reasons they give. Sometimes they change a bit, but basically it remains the same. One is that they say Tibet started to become a part of China when a Chinese princess was given to the king of Tibet in the 7th century. Now this is technically correct. The 33rd king of Tibet, Songtsen Gampo, took a Chinese princess as his queen, but he also had a Tibetan queen, who probably was the senior one, and he also had a Nepalese queen. I think it was probably the style of kings in those days to either to create alliances or to show their masculinity maybe, and to have princesses from neighboring countries to be part of it. So whatever the case, these princesses from Nepal and China also came to Tibet, and in fact they were the ones who actually laid the groundwork for the introduction of Buddhism. So simply because a princess came to Tibet is really, there's no historical basis of saying Tibet became a part of China. In fact, historians who are studying Tibet in the early history of Tibet, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century, will say that not only was Tibet kind of a society that was quite organized in a very effective kingdom, but it, in the 8th and 9th century, created a Tibetan empire beyond the Tibetan borders and was one of the fairly powerful empires in Central Asia. The Tibetans were, at that time, one could say on the par with the Chinese empire, the Chinese kingdom, the Persian empire, and it was like in the heart of Asia long before the Mongols were even present in Tibet. So that's a quick background to that period. And then the next argument is that Tibet definitely became a part of China during the Yuan dynasty. And the Yuan dynasty, of course, ruled China in the 13th and roughly the 13th, 14th century. But they failed to point out that the Yuan dynasty is the dynasty which was Kublai Khan's rule of China. Now, those who know Mongol history and world history will tell you that the Mongols ruled from Europe to the Sea of Japan and down to Vietnam. And the fact that China became a part or conquered by the Mongols no way can be used to justify, that Tibet became a part of China. It's like saying during British India, Burma was part of British India. So you can't say, India should now take over Burma because it was part of the British Raj. It was Indian Raj, you could say. So that is another argument. And in fact, again here, if we go into the history a little more carefully, it seems that the Tibetans actually had an independent relationship with the Mongols before they even conquered China. In fact, Tibet may have been one of the few places in the world at that time that was not actually conquered by the Mongols, but the Tibetans were either too close or they were smart enough to have a relationship with the Mongols where Tibet became a real protectorate in a sense during, from the time of Genghis Khan down to Kublai Khan. So that's another issue. And then the third reason given is that the Chinese empire definitely had a lot of power and control, actual administrative control of Tibet during the Qing dynasty. Now the Qing dynasty too is not exactly, one could say, a Chinese ruling dynasty, but the Manchu rule and occupation of China in a sense. I think in the turn of the century, a lot of Chinese revolutionary rhetoric was about getting foreign rule out of China, and that, I believe, included the Manchus. But whatever, during that period, it's true in the 17th, 18th century, up to the 19th century, when the Manchu Empire was in control of China, they did have a tremendous amount of influence. They even sent armies into Tibet for different reasons and had a lot of influence in Tibet. That's true. But the Tibetan view is that may be true just because you had tremendous influence and armies coming in does not make you a part of that country or that empire. Much like, you could say Iraq, you would never say is part of the United States right now, even though there's a tremendous effective, army and control in Iraq. So something like that. So the debate is historical in a sense, and Tibetans have a very different interpretation of that history. So to be brief on that.
I would like to thank you for speaking here, and I have 3 questions. Sorry for so many questions. But the first one is about the demonstration. I understand you were involved in the demonstration. And from the Chinese side, I've heard some allegations about the integrity of the demonstration. In particular, it was said that some people were hired, they were given salaries on an hourly basis or on day basis to participate as professional protesters. I wonder whether you could share your comments on that, and also talk a little bit more about the measures that your campaign employed to secure the integrity of the campaign itself. The second question is, now the biggest waves of the demonstration is pretty much over with the torch going away from India. Could you evaluate the achievements of the protest? Does it serve the purpose well, and do the protesters achieve their goal they set before the demonstration? And the third question is...
Should I try these 2 first before I get? And then I'll do the third. First question about people who are organizing the demonstration, who were paid or not. As far as I know the small Tibetan community in the Bay Area quite well, because there are only about 1,200 of them, and most of them, 90% of them, I think arrived only in the last 10 years, most of them. Before that, there was only about less than 50 Tibetans in the Bay Area. So I know the 50 quite well, and among the rest, I know most of them quite well, especially those who are part of the community organization, the work they do. As far as I know, I don't think there's a single person who's been paid to do anything. This is entirely within the community. I myself am surprised because so many of the community members, old and young, have been very actively participating, not just in protesting. They were, from March 10th, every night they were having prayer sessions. So, as I tried to point out before, this is not just to vent anger, but also to find resolution, to find peace. So, when they pray, they are praying basically Buddhist prayers, and Buddhist prayers don't say, save me, but send them to hell. It's like, save me from my own anger, help them understand, help those who are harming us also be free of anger and misunderstanding. So, as far as I know, there is no such thing like paid people. But because they are small but very organized, and they also have a lot of other people participating with them. This is not just, shall we say, average Americans, so to speak, but a lot of other Asian groups, Asian American groups, including Chinese Americans too. So if you'd like to meet the community, meet individually, it's a very open book. I'm happy to introduce you, and if you want to find out more, we can do that. There is no organized, paid people doing this kind of stuff. Absolutely not, as far as I know. Now, in terms of have they achieved their goals, I'm not sure how to define that, most people took part in the demonstration simply so that attention would be paid to Tibet, and so that people in the world would know about it, and especially the Chinese government. The focus is on the Chinese government. So the small prayer groups and demonstrations in San Francisco probably went up to the Chinese consulate like 4 or 5 times in the last 2 weeks, simply to draw attention. So if they've been able to draw some attention from the Chinese officials and maybe created some awareness among the Chinese American community or the Chinese community, they may have had some success, but I can't measure any full success. When I was, out on the street, there was a lot of shouting going on. Also, if you've heard, many of the Chinese who came with the flags, some of them were very angry, and me and others, there were some young Tibetans shouting back equally loud. But many of us tried to talk, and 8 or 9 out of 10 times we couldn't have a conversation. It was just everybody was too excited. They were literally like waving flags in each other's face and trying to shout somebody down. But I did speak to a few people, and it was very good because you can communicate. I just want to share one small incident where one young Chinese student girl, I don't know, young woman, came, and she was very upset, and she was also, almost in tears, and she said, you're doing this protest, you are hurting my feelings. And he said, and you're also hurting the millions of Chinese people. This is Olympics, this is for sports, and you're making this such an unpleasant thing. You're hurting our feelings. So I said, that's probably true. And I said, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. But I also want you to know that the Tibetan people have much more grievances than a sport event that's going, spoiled. The Tibetan people have suffered so much, you don't know how much they've suffered. Don't you think we feel hurt? So when I had that discussion, I think she understood something. Of course the Chinese people can get hurt, but so can we. We're not much different from each other. In this case, it's not like the Chinese and the Tibetans are like equal, sparring partners. There's a tremendous difference in, first of all, size, secondly, power, and thirdly, who has the real grievances, so to speak. So I think if you can see it in that context, it would be very helpful. Third question.
The last question. I was in the protest too that day, but on the other side. On that day, over 200 students from Stanford participated. They're Chinese, and it's about a third of the Chinese population, the student population here in Stanford. So it's unprecedented turnout. My last question is, were you surprised to see the response of Chinese, including those in China and those overseas Chinese? They responded strongly. Was that something expected, or did it come as a surprise?
Expected, because I think we know that a lot of the Chinese feel very strongly about this whole Tibetan issue. But we also know that most Chinese students, and of course people in China, know very little about what happened to Tibet and what is happening in Tibet. Because I assume 90 to 99% of the information is that which has been coming out from the official sources. Of course, now those who are outside China, you have full access to the information. And if Chinese students and scholars will just make themselves available to the information that's out there, there is a much more complicated issue regarding Tibet. And I was not too surprised that many of them were upset, but the more we are able to talk and share, I think the majority of the Chinese who then at least get a sense of why we are doing this and what are our reasons, I think understand it and become actually quite sympathetic about the Tibetan view. Because if we make it a very open discussion and go through all the facts of what has happened and what is happening, there is no need to argue. The facts will sort of speak for themselves. I think that's what I think. So I'm happy to I'm here around here all the time, and I know that there are about 500 or so students who are from China or of Chinese background. I'm happy to speak to them. Thank you.
My name is Lawson, and I'm a Spider-Man. And I have no actual question, but I have a little bit more additional information about how I feel as a Tibetan during the demonstration in San Francisco. Actually, my wife is Chinese from Taiwan, and so I pretty much hang around and with the Chinese from China and Taiwan. So that's why I can feel how the Chinese are feeling about current situation in Tibet and what the Tibetan people has been doing in Tibet and India. So so I'm very sad that actually, by the way, thank you very much for coming here. And I usually like to talk to more Chinese people about the Tibet than the other people, because I want to make friends with them. I want to discuss with them, as student has always been saying that. So so that's why one sad thing for me is really how many Chinese they know about the Tibet. Very little. So my masseuse are Chinese from China, and my chiropractors from China. So since March 10th, whenever I visit there, they're looking at differently. And especially my neighbors from China, 70 years old lady, she's a doctor too. When she usually very friendly with me. So since March 10th, when she looked at me, she started looking differently. She even told my wife, Tibetan people is killing Chinese in China, in Tibet. So this is she told, and my wife tried to explain to her, what the reality is. She really doesn't want to listen. And the one reason is because she reads only Chinese newspaper and watch CCTV. And second thing is, she's in older generation, and no matter how much I try to, compromise her and tell the reality, she doesn't want to listen to it. This is actually a natural kind of thing. I've been dealing with many Chinese students in Dianza College, so I have a lot of Chinese student friends there. So, I'll make it short. So I was in San Francisco that day, and where there's a Chinese group next to us, and they actually asked us the same question as you asked me right now. How much you got paid today? I was surprised, like, what are you talking about? So we thought, now our guessing, maybe they got paid. That's what they're asking to us. So this is, we kind of start thinking each other like that way. And then, I usually, I never feel hatred or anger to Chinese. I feel always sympathy and, feel bad about them because they have no chance to learn about all the reality story is. And so I met with the two young Chinese from Berkeley University that day. And then, so we had almost 1 hour conversation, and, he, at the beginning, he was very, upset about us, why you're ruining our, celebration here. And I said, like, so I would tell him the truth. I told him all our information, and, since you're in America, you can read and write English. So you probably, saw a lot of news about what's going on in Tibet. So then, we shared each other, and then, I told him, if you really want to know what the Dalai Lama's, talking about in the world about Chinese and Tibetan people. So, and then he said, I'm really happy to, learn that. I really want to learn that. So I just, went back home and tried to send the link, tibet.net. That was hacked that day. So I told him, I'm sorry, this is the website, but actually it's currently hacked. So, and then I will send you more information through other link. So then he sent me back email after, he can open the this website and say, thank you so much for your kindness to me. Though we are on different side, but I think we have more similarity than different. I understand your sorrow, and I pray that you can still see the light of hope in the darkness. And it is currently every Chinese job to serve justice. I will, along with many of my comrades, strive for better China for all. I hope that one day our country can truly treat everyone equally and truly treat every ethnic city as one into our family. So this is, I think a God bless, you people, and Zhong Yu, Tiger Wu. So Tiger is actually an English name he made in America. So So yeah, I feel really like great that the younger people are really listening, about what's been, they're eager to learn. So about 45 or 50, age of that range. So it's very difficult to talk to them. At the beginning when I introduced myself in a classroom, I'm Tibetan. And then as soon as they say, oh, we are from USA, where she's on, and then, as soon as they heard, but I'm from India, I was born and raised in India, they feel very upset about me, even they don't want to talk to me sometimes, I try so hard to, make a friend with them. So this is sort of like my own experience has been in this country and being, especially with my Chinese communities around me. Thank you.
Who was first?
I think she was first, and then here, and there.
Okay. Before I give the mic to you, on that note, I have a question for you. We're talking so much about China, but about the treatment India has given to Tibetans. And what I read in the newspapers is that Tibetans need an identity card and all kinds of paperwork to even use public transportation. Is that true?
Well, very quick. Welcomed the Dalai Lama when he first came out of Tibet as an honored guest. So he's been treated as an honored guest. I'm sure there's a political underpinning to this, but primarily I think because the Dalai Lama came to India in 1956 for the Buddha Jayanti, and as much as Buddhism is India's greatest sort of export throughout history, there is very little Indian Buddhism left, and in some sense the Buddhism which the Tibetans are preserving and practicing is part of India's cultural legacy. So I think there's a special feeling about that in India. So as a result of that, all the refugees that came out in the early 60s were basically given refugee status by the government of India. And the government of India also helped with the resettlement of Tibetans in agricultural and small industry settlements. Nothing like you would find maybe in a settlement program in the United States. For example, Tibetans who were settled in South India, like a family of 5 would get 1 acre of land, which is like impossible to survive on these days. But at the least, it was a place where collectively the Tibetans 500 Tibetans would have 100 acres. They could build a school, they could build a temple, they could create a community. So we have close to about 120 to 130,000 Tibetan refugees in India. So they have legal status as refugees, and if they need to travel, the Indian government gives them a travel document, which is a complicated bureaucratic process, but they nevertheless can get one. And within India, they are given permanent residency, although they have to renew that residency almost every year. But within the confines of all these restrictions, the Indian government has been kind of neutral on the Tibetans, and the Indian public in general has been sort of very generous, as most Indians and those who've lived in India know. India is kind of free and open, and there are communal problems once in a while, but generally there's so many communities that the Tibetans don't really necessarily stand out in any.
Okay, one more question before we start brainstorming. So who wants to go? Let's see. I think from China. I'm going to be biased towards Chinese today.
I'm a Chinese student in Stanford. So just first I want to say in regards to the previous speaker's comments. So I think China does have information censorship, but I don't think the current emotion of the Chinese are completely caused by the lack of information. Because I know, like a lot of friends, they're in China, nowadays the internet, people try to look for information by themselves. They don't really trust the information from the government. And then there's a lot of overseas Chinese who reads the Western media, newspaper, and as well as the Chinese information. And most of them have the same feeling as the rest of Chinese in regards to this event. They kind of anger at this attitude towards the Olympics. So I think even if there's if the Chinese government is the information censorship, there will still be more or less the same kind of emotion from the Chinese people. I think many those who are Chinese, they try to get to know as much about that as possible. So some of them, because of the internet, they can kind of get, and also because a lot of tourists, Chinese tourists, going to travel in Tibet, and they make Tibetan friends. So they got some information and knowledge about Tibet. And I'm wondering, comparing with the Tibetan exiles who's never actually been to Tibet, they're born and raised in India or West. I'm wondering how much those people they know about Tibet, compared with those set of more well-informed Chinese people. But in any case, I think this is a complicated issue, and both sides have legitimate or illegitimate claim. However, I found I also went to San Francisco, and I saw not only Tibetans, Chinese, there are also a lot of Americans there. I think in terms regarding the knowledge of Tibet, I guess Americans probably know the least. However, I feel like the Western media, when they're reporting this event, although both sides have claims and stories, they tend to focus on the Tibetan side. For example, in San Francisco, the CNN tends to, I think there are equal number, that's from my just rough estimate, there are equal number of people who stand on the pro-Tibet side and the pro-China side. But definitely the media puts more coverage on those people on the pro-Tibet side. And also for the march unrest in Tibet, the Western media tends to focus on more on the crackdown by the Chinese government instead of the riots, the Tibetan riots on the innocent Chinese first. And also the Western media tends to report more about whether the religious restriction or the grievance of some of the Tibetans. But as far as I know, there are also a lot of Tibetans in China who was actually quite happy or satisfied with the current economic situation. And just I heard before the like in 1950, the average life expectancy of Tibetans is 33, and now it's 67, so it's more than double. So there are also many Tibetans who are actually satisfied by the current situation. So I think both sides have claims and stories, but the media tends to report more about the Tibetan side. So do you think this is true? And also, do you think this actually creates a bias in terms of the Western people? And
they have the right information. They're, living in exile. There's a point there, but I should just give you a background. Only about 120,000 Tibetans sort of left Tibet by the early 60s, and from 1959 until 1979, there was absolutely no traffic of people or any kind of information, not even a letter, not even a telephone went to Tibet. So there was a complete shutdown. So by 1979, you could say the Tibetans in exile have no idea what's happened in Tibet because there was a glorious cultural revolution going on. But after 1979, Deng Xiaoping opened up China, and I don't know if you're aware of this, he considered this Tibetan issue a very important one, although it was not well known outside. He actually put Ho Yabang, party general secretary, in charge of doing a major fix on the Tibetan issue. So Ho Yabang and Deng Xiaoping actually invited the Dalai Lama's brother, who was living in Hong Kong at the time, and Deng Xiaoping basically said, short of separation, that means short of breaking away or independence, everything and anything can be discussed. I think this is a Chinese way of saying it, basically meaning everything and anything can be gotten short of separation. And Ho Yabang actually visited Tibet in 1980 and took major steps to improve the situation. One of the first one was that he said 80% of the Chinese cadres need to leave Tibet, and actually started the process. Unfortunately, Ho Yabang didn't live very long. He died around 1984 or 5. Then a lot of other problems happened in Tibet and in China, Tiananmen Square, and basically all these policies regarding fixing things in Tibet and within China totally took a backward step. But in the meantime, Tibet did open up just as China, rest of China opened up. And so the exiled Tibetans have tremendous amount of communication. Everybody in exile probably renewed their family contacts in Tibet. And those in Tibet came out in tens of thousands into India to meet their priests, their family members, to meet the Dalai Lama. So every year, between 4,000 to 5,000 Tibetans were coming out every year, especially in the winter months. India is hot in the summer. And out of that, roughly 2,000 on the average have been staying behind in India now. So that means from 1980 till now, easily 20,000, 30,000 more Tibetans are staying in India. And among the Tibetan communities outside India, there's just a few thousand in Europe, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 in Canada, and now maybe 5,000 to 10,000 in the United States. Even in these communities, many Tibetans have come out directly from Tibet now, because you can get a passport and you can get a visa, and so many Tibetans are. So the communication between Tibetans in exile and inside Tibet is actually quite vibrant, considering the number of people. So many of the people who are demonstrating here in San Francisco, if you have the opportunity, I'll be more than happy to introduce them. Many of them actually have come from Tibet in the last 5 to 10 years, and they can also speak Chinese, because some of them have gone to school in the nationality school. Others have learned Chinese in Tibet, in the school in Lhasa. So it's not just the exiles who are sort of protesting and they don't know what's going on in Tibet, I think. And cell phones work very well. In fact, they work better calling from here into Tibet and China than calling India, where we have called family members. For some reason, it's still a problem. I was calling my brother this morning, and it sort of got cut off a few times. I said, "What's this? This thing's supposed to have been solved 20 years ago, and calls are going in absolutely clear into Tibet, right, into some remote parts on cell phones, and it's not going to Delhi properly." So anyway, the point is that there's very good communication among the young Tibetans. So it's not just exiled Tibetans who are brought up in India and born in the US who are just being fanatical with no information. There is real connection, and I'm happy to try and substantiate that if you want to meet with the community. And the other part was the media, whether the media is fair or not. I too felt they were a little bit unfair. And I'll tell you why, because when I went to the march and all, I saw Africans, rows, hundreds of Africans in the green Darfur shirts. There were Burmese monks with Save Burma. They were walking up Golden Gate Bridge, and there were so many other groups, and the focus was, to a large extent, on Tibetans. And there were not many Tibetans. In total, there may have been like 2,000 Tibetans, really. Because in the Bay Area, there's only about 1,000, and a few hundred came from Salt Lake. I know about 30 came from Salt Lake City, and about 69 or 70 came from LA, because that's probably the total number of Tibetans in LA. So, so in total there were really only about 2,000 Tibetans. But they were vocal and very organized, so it may have looked like there were tons of Tibetans out there. But so the attention was a little unfair. I thought, where's Darfur and where's the Burmese? They put in a lot of work to, and absolutely no. And did you see any mention of the Uyghurs? There was some Uyghur delegation running around, Eastern Turkestan, Xinjiang people also protesting, but nobody heard of them or saw them. So in that sense, you could say the press coverage may have been a bit unfair, but it also shows that there's a tremendous amount of attention or focus on Tibet and the Tibetan issue. There's no denying that. Now, whether this is because Tibetan Buddhists are able to have hundreds and thousands of converts in America or not, I have no idea. Whether it's the charm and charisma of the Dalai Lama, I don't know. Or whether it's just these little groups that are super dedicated and organized, I don't know. Or it could just be a combination of all that. Or it's just that the Chinese government is really not doing a good job, and so people just want to point that out. Does it make sense? I'm trying to be fair and reasonable.
Well,
All right, I have one question before we move on. Have you tried Reliance?
Pardon?
Have you tried Reliance?
Reliance, oh, I don't know what the service was on the other end, but I was just calling on AT&T.
I think we should move on to the last part. I know we're running a little over time, so if people are really hungry, there's dinner for you outside. But in the meantime, I want to ask you a specific question, and that is, during India's freedom struggle, Mahatma Gandhi used the English language to educate the English people about what is going on in India. So have the Tibetans considered maybe starting a Chinese newspaper by which they can reach the Chinese community?
Well, if the party had come in what is Tibet Autonomous Region and the other Tibetan areas which are under Sichuan and Qinghai, in all these areas, as far as I know, many writers, teachers, authors, including the political leadership, have had continuous dialogue with officials in Beijing about Tibetan grievances and also, internal saying, you've got to fix this or, there's going to be problems. But unfortunately, most of the Tibetan entreatments have not had attention. So in exile, there are many different groups trying to do that. We have, I don't know if you've heard, we have a Tibetan student who just graduated from Harvard. He was there doing law, and he spent his last 10 years not finishing his degree, but organizing sort of closed-door meetings with Chinese scholars and Tibet scholars. Then he brought together Chinese officials from China and exiled Tibetan officials. Then he brought together just community leaders who are working on development issues in Tibet and China with others who are doing work. So there's this thing going on for the last 10 or 20 years. And he also organized like 50 to 100 Chinese scholars to meet with the Dalai Lama privately and secretly at Harvard. So the Tibetan attempt is very sort of open and sincere. And there's another group, I think in India, based in India, but it's internet-based, so I guess you could say it's virtual, where there are about 10 young Tibetans who actually speak and write Chinese, who are having an online communication with Chinese from all over China. So there are efforts like this going on all the time.
We have to remember the closed-door one when Dalai Lama comes next to Stanford.
But
We'll have to remember the closed-door effort.
yes,
We can do
yes,
that again
of
when
course.
Dalai Lama visits Stanford.
He has always been open and he's met many Chinese.
So let's hear some ideas from the audience. Any positive ideas, no criticism now. Any ideas of moving this along? All right.
And then you.
Brief, 1 minute idea.
Samik, you're really discriminating me. I believe we part of the Sarvodaya group, and one of the Gandhian philosophy, which of course non-violence is practiced highly by Dalai Lama. But if you remember, the main thing that we also practice, bottom line is economics. Why doesn't America go and do the right wrong? Like it went to Iraq when it invaded Kuwait, because money. So the bottom line is India actually burnt all the British goods to pinch the economics, if you know the Indian independence movement. And I would think that the brainstorming would be to be finding a way where you could pinch China with the economic thing. And I'm going to take 1 more minute. I can't wait. I was putting my hand up. I'm happy some Chinese are here, and I'm not paid. I'm a simple human being. I'm not enlightened, so my passion may grow up. But and I don't have the Tibetan genes. Like I really admire him the way he's so calm and composed and politically correct, standing there giving all the answers. The Chinese cry of boycotting the Olympics is something like the French Revolution, that you don't have cake. If you don't have bread, go and eat cake. Basically, we are first generation immigrants in this country, and you know how it is to feel as an economic immigrant. We are here out of choice. But these people were pushed out, the culture was wiped out. Because I met Dalai Lama when I was 15 years old, and I heard it from the word of mouth how the Chinese main power came into Tibet, tried to wipe out the language, which is your birthright, to have a right to language, your religion, and your basic human rights and freedom, which were wiped out by the Chinese to invade into Tibet. It wasn't just acquiring the land; it was acquiring the whole soul of people, and that really burns me. And I'm very happy. I appreciate Chinese civilization and culture and all the good things, but just because the majority wrongs doesn't make it right. If everyone agrees, the media agrees with the wrongs, it doesn't become right. So I also appreciate that you are aware that if the propaganda is so much in China, but right to information is not there for the common Chinese, they're not really aware of what the Tibetans have gone through.
I feel very badly. I felt badly at the beginning. I continue to feel badly. This was China's moment to shine. I was in Shanghai this time last year and was very happy to see the huge glittering progress of that city and how wonderful it is for the Chinese to feel this burst into the 21st century that they've experienced. And the Olympics was to be kind of this crowning glory of that. So all of that was very good. And every day I taste for myself this kind of sense of the bitterness of what it feels like to have the world not joining in that party full-heartedly. I know that hurts, and I feel that hurt. However, I've been involved in my own way in the Tibetan community for 35 years and am well aware of what I think, the knowledge I've gained of inside and outside Tibet, what the situation has been. I've lived in Singapore. I think I understand a bit about the Chinese approach to politics and culture and other people's culture as well. I think the best that can be hoped now is this is going to polarize the Chinese government. I don't think it's going to bring them to the table, but I think that it's going to get before the world community a presence of the issues that has never been there before, ever, in a multitude of strength and vibrance. And if there's a way of making that stick a bit, to not have it just recede once the Olympics are over, but to somehow have groups established or some sort of something take root around the world as people become more aware of what has happened in Tibet. I'm very concerned about the environmental issues and some dams that are spoken of to I think dam the Sujlat, one of the rivers that comes out of the plateau. I know there's a plan to dam that, which is very disturbing for a lot of environmental reasons. And I just think the awareness has got to be put before the world that Tibet cannot be used as a trash dump by the nation of China as they go forward, along with a lot of the other issues. And I hope that this is not a flash in the pan, and that there's a way of sustaining the awareness and the interest that is out there in these brief months.
One minute comment.
Okay. I will keep it short. I just want to thank Sarvodaya and also the two Chinese speakers who spoke. To me, the most positive thing and also the most difficult thing that an ordinary person can do is actually speak in a conversation that has a chance to progress with people who have truly different experiences, different upbringings, and different kind of worldviews. And it's almost, it's extremely difficult to do that. So I think, what you're doing is, it might seem like it couldn't possibly have an effect because it's at the individual level and we're dealing with issues of international relations and so on. But I would just support any efforts, and I know it's almost impossible for me to actually speak in an ongoing and friendly and open way to somebody who has a really different point of view, but I think if each one of us could actually manage to do that around this issue, that would demonstrate that it's actually possible. And so I just want to wave a flag for simple, ordinary dialogue between ordinary people, not world leaders, but in particular, beyond the boundary of who you might be comfortable talking with. So.
Thank you so much for that comment. And in fact, that just leads me to the next thing. We do want a continuous dialogue with the Chinese community, because we sort of organized this one in a rush. We don't have as many Chinese people, but next one, we can get a speaker that can represent a different opinion. We can engage. So if you want to stay in touch, there's a sign-up sheet outside. You can give your email address. They'll join Sarvodaya or Sanskriti, the other co-sponsoring organization of this event. Now, are there any undergrads who want to share something? Usually they have the bright ideas, because they don't have the private investment. Oh, are you undergrad?
I'm not an undergrad.
Is there any undergrad? Undergrad. An undergrad gets the mic.
Hi. I'm an undergrad. Actually seniors as well, a little bit of time here. But I went to, there was something I was talking about with Josh the other day, actually he's also an undergrad. When I was at they organized Josh I think organized the speeches around the Freedom Torch coming to Stanford, like last week. And well, during one of the speakers, there was a Chinese student in the back who was kind of yelling, like protesting on his own, But it didn't really make me upset or anything, but something the person next to me mentioned, the person I was there with, he was saying, he looked so upset, he was looked like he was about to cry, And so it's just that really made me feel for him. Because there's pain on both sides of the issue. And I'd really like to see that, people be more open to each other and to each other's pain. Because it's not just Tibetans' pain, but it's also Chinese pain as well. And so I think that's really important to recognize. But I think, what helps is people opening their minds and broadening their perspectives. Because I know a lot of, American activists who, seem to have, closed mind towards Tibet and don't, open their minds towards, what Chinese people feel too. But then I also feel that, it's on both sides, and that, Chinese people as well need to also broaden their perspectives outside to just, what they think and what they know, but think that there are other possibilities, that other things could be happening that maybe they don't know about, So, this is my
That's sentiment. Did you have
I did.
a quick idea
Okay.
in a minute?
Well, I was an undergrad. And I would also like to point out that I am Chinese, but I do feel very much for the Tibetan situation. I wrote a paper actually on Tibet when I was taking a class by the class, it's actually a Gandhi class. But anyway, I would actually like to invoke music and art as a way of healing this whole situation, because maybe we don't have a tangible solution right now, or a foreseeable one, but at least we can have a vision of what that piece would be like, and I think music and art would be the best way to express it.
That was a great idea. Maybe we should do that at the next event, have a joint musical performance. We have one there. I'm going to go back from the young crowd to someone I know always has bright ideas. Professor Howard. Do you have something to share?
Well, I was an undergraduate a long time ago. What I was thinking was about a conversation where each party presents the other person's point of view. In other words, what would the Tibetans say about the Chinese view of Tibet? And what would a Chinese person say about the Tibetans' view of China? So, I hear things like, from the Chinese point of view, Tibet is this wonderful country with Tibetan Buddhism and all that, things that many Americans admire. But I've heard Chinese people say, it's really a feudal country and a backward one, and they ought to be glad that we're raising their standard of living, and and increasing the mortality, they're decreasing the mortality rate and so forth. And yet the Tibetans say, and I met a Tibetan in Lhasa who had gone to India, and I said, well, why did you come back? He said, well, the Chinese government threatened to fire my parents from their jobs in Tibet if he didn't come back, so he came back. So when you take each point of view, one is you're ruining my culture. They're making me maybe richer. I mean, there are figures on the net investment in Tibet by China. I mean, a lot of infrastructure and so forth. They're planning even more. And from the Chinese point of view, the one I was expressing, this is wonderful because the whole economy is going up. From the Tibetan point of view, the Chinese are invading the country and taking over our culture. So I like to see that kind of conversation because I think that's what really illuminates. When you can take the other person's position, then you can understand why there is a dispute.
Well, I should add to that by saying, you know, apart from sort of the historical reasons I gave you, I'll tell you what the Chinese have said about coming to Tibet. In 1950, when the People's Liberation Army actually came to Tibet, the army entered Tibetan territory, but they said we will call this a peaceful liberation, and this is a liberation of the Tibetan people from Western imperialists, because they are Westerners meddling in Tibet. And as far as I know, at that time, there were two Westerners in Tibet. One is this famous Henrik Harder of 7 years in Tibet, and the other one was an employee of the Tibetan government, a British radio operator called Reginald Fox, I believe. So there were only two. And then this was the liberation, and then the Tibetans were forced to be part of that liberation, and many Tibetans went to China in the 50s on these big sort of educational tours. Tibetan monks, lamas, officials, ordinary people. Several hundred young Tibetans went to the Minority Nationalities Institute in Beijing, and within 5 or 6 years there was a tremendous interaction with Tibetans and Chinese. And many of the Chinese party people especially, and even government officers, were extremely enthusiastic and dedicated to making Tibet a modern showcase. It seems at that time many were sincerely of the belief that China was going to be a modern, democratic, socialist, society. And not only was China going to change for the better, though they were going to be part of making the world equal and better and, whatever. And the Tibetans were just the first beneficiary of that revolution, truly. And many Tibetans were also very impressed with what the Chinese officials and military officers did in Tibet. That was it. And then, as you know, everything went down the drain, so to speak. And since then, it hasn't really corrected itself. As I told you, Deng Xiaoping and Ho Yobang, Deng Xiaoping is not a minor political figure in Chinese history, nor is Ho Yobang. And they took Tibet as a very serious issue, but it hasn't really changed. How many Tibetans are benefiting, from the economic development? There are some studies done by some scholars based purely on official Chinese statistics, government statistics, and it will show that maybe less than 1 or 2% of Tibetans really benefit. Some are benefiting, but 1 or 2% in a society is not a very high percentage figure. So in conclusion, I know all our focus is on the media and the Olympics, but the real focus is people in Tibet have demonstrated very unusual because for the longest time, the official Chinese view is that, look, there's no real trouble in Tibet. Every now and then there's a protest in Lhasa, and that's because there's some remnants of Dalai clique or feudal leftover. The rest of Tibet is fine. This time, the demonstrations that has happened over 50 places, and it's still going on right now, it seems. And most of this has happened in Tibetan areas which are actually considered quite safe and settled because they are within the provinces of China. The Tibetan area in Yunnan, the Tibetan areas under Sichuan, and Qinghai and Gansu. So this is where it's like a shock to us outside, and it's probably a bigger shock to the Chinese officials in Beijing. They never expect, they may have expected a protest or two in Lhasa, but what is happening elsewhere? And I think I just try to remind everyone that while this is happening, it's political, it's dramatic, but the people in Tibet who did this, they are now going to suffer maybe quite seriously for the next few months or maybe for a few years. They know how serious the consequences are. You're going to be arrested in droves, and already many hundreds are arrested. You're going to be maybe tortured, mistreated. Many will die or be shot, or many have been lost already. And then the, shall we say, subjugation or manipulation or whatever is just going to go on among the extended family and community for a long time. So the Tibetans are not stupid not to know this, the people who are demonstrating, but I think it's a clear case of the sort of serious, desperation. They have no way but to do this, and they're going to pay a very heavy price in terms of human suffering. So that is something we all need to keep in mind. It's not just the Olympic torch. That's taking the, it's drawing all the attention, but actually people are really going to suffer out there.
Okay, the last idea
One is that Chinese has tremendous amount of business around their history over the last 100 or so years, and the country being divided and exploited. So anything about separating part of the country is so closely associated, right or wrong, with this bitterness of the Chinese. The second reason is that from their earlier education and from the general opinion of the public, the Tibet area, being part of China, is closely associated with the core identification of Chinese. That's why when you attack the problem, when you advocate for the freedom of Tibet, you see Chinese get very angry. There are a lot of shouts and a lot of tears. The email notifying this event tonight was sent to the Chinese community, but the people who received it hesitated when we thought about forwarding it to more people, because today the Chinese you see here are the most moderate and mild Chinese. The Chinese general public now has been polarized. And this is a tremendous
Get a sense of,
on the other side.
I know it's probably a very complicated issue between Tibet and
On
China,
one side,
but are there any fundamental issues, and what is the nature of the issues between them?
on the other side, I will say,
Religious, independence, is it economic?
So now we have addressed it, and issues on the table that's continuing to discuss. At the same time, I hope with all the rituals held this summer, you could enjoy the game and share the joy of China.
Just want to tell people about that.
Hi, my name is Josh Rouse. I'm a sophomore undergrad, and I didn't actually start this group. It was started in 1992. It's experienced like different amounts of support over the years, but a student that has recently graduated, Yangshan Lama, who's the cousin of a current Tibetan sophomore on campus, reinitiated the group, and if it wasn't for her, we probably wouldn't have any. We probably wouldn't be where we are now, which is not too far, but we have a lot of plans. So March 10th, March 14th, last quarter, I started seeing everything I'm interested in studying kind of come to life. I'm interested in international relations, Tibetan studies, and religious studies in general. So after that, I decided we really need to get this group started. Fall quarter of last year, we started brainstorming ideas. Winter quarter, everything kind of died down. So spring quarter is pretty much the time for us to act. So we have plans. We have big plans for this quarter. We've already started a documentary series every Monday with discussions. We organized the Tibetan Freedom Torch event last week, and we hope to have panel discussions in the future. But the big thing, obviously, is going to be discussion and dialogue. And I really liked Professor Howard. I really like that idea. I think that'll be great for the discussion. I think we should have a period where we swap perspectives. But it's going to be very hard, I guess, to engage with both sides on campus, and we'll definitely need a lot of support. We'll need to definitely, I have some Chinese friends on campus, Chinese students that don't agree with me. I talk to them often. Conversations always end well. We always end like laughing most of the time. The issue is serious though, and I really hope like by the end of the quarter we can have a huge discussion on campus. Mostly for undergrads, but I guess we'll invite everybody that's interested. But we want to reach a conclusion and we want to actually have minds change, because there are definitely minds that need to be changed. There's definitely writers from this issue that they want to approach it as objectively as possible and as sensitively as possible and as peacefully as possible. And we have big plans. I'm really nervous right now. But so I just want to let everybody know about that. We have a mailing list outside if you want to stay informed on the groups. Yeah, the name of the group. You might think it's Students for Free Tibet. It's Stanford Friends of Tibet. So all you have to have are good intentions for Tibet. You can be Chinese, Indian, American, any nationality, doesn't matter. We just want to like initiate dialogue, and that's our goal. So that's the name of the group. We have a mailing list outside, a short description if I haven't been clear enough, which I probably haven't. That's about it.
Thank you very much. And now we have not Tibetan, not Chinese, but Greek food waiting for you. Please enjoy yourself. And this is also a time outside of our national affiliation where we can just be friends and discuss further. So Denzin is here, and our Chinese friends are here, our American, Indian, everybody's out here. So please share your ideas and enjoy yourself. Thank you.